Me. It's a great honor to receive this award. You guys are my scientific family, so you've enriched my life by my interactions with you through IETS or otherwise. So it means a lot to win this award. I'm very grateful, humbled. I've spent a lot of time thinking what kind of presentation I want to give. I don't want to just catalog all the research projects as we've done over the years, but instead I've always loved this award because it's called the Pioneer Award. And as a kid growing up, we used to learn in history class about the great pioneers in history. So I've always been enamored of the word that is affiliated with this award. And one of the things pioneers do is go on journeys. And ever since I was a kid, I've loved the idea of journeying, whether on foot or on bicycle or in a car. I just like the idea of going on a journey. And I think, pioneers go on a journey. So I entitled this talk, Journeying Along the Embryo Highway, or Why I Love Embryo Research. And you can see that's Thiago Amaral, who was my graduate student at the time. We had just finished doing a bunch of embryo transfers. He did the transfers at Derry, about 3.5 hours from Gainesville. And as we were heading home, you can kind of see the rain clouds forming in the back, and the headlight fell off of Thiago's car. So not always smooth sailing on the embryo highway, but it's certainly a lot of fun. So I just want to reflect on that. And like I said, when I grew up, pioneers were people like Daniel Boone, the man who discovered the Cumberland Gap in the Appalachian Mountains and led to the settling of Kentucky. And I am certainly not Daniel Boone. Anybody who knows me, like my daughter there, Megan, and my wife, Nancy, knows that I am not a very good orienter in the woods. So whenever I go hiking with Megan and we come to a fork in the road, she'll say, should we go left or should we go right? And if I say right, she'll go left. So she's always correct. So if I was Daniel Boone, we probably never would have found Kentucky. But I think about people like Daniel Boone. Why did they do it, right? Why did they explore Kentucky back when it was very dangerous to do so? Maybe wealth. Like Daniel Boone became wealthy after he found the Cumberland Gap. He got a lot of land in Kentucky, but he lost that land. He died broke. Fame, people still talk about Daniel Boone in the United States. But I think really what drives a lot of people who are pioneers is the journey, the wondrous things that they see, and the people they see it with, experience it with, and the sense of discovery. Like one of the people who really intrigued me in history is this guy, Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, so cow's head. He was a nobleman from Spain, and he was part of the first expedition to explore Florida, and it was a disaster. The commander of the expedition said he would take the ships and move further north. A hurricane came, the ships were never seen again, or the commander. So they walked through Florida, they fought the native people, they all got malaria, people were dying. So they built rafts to sail back to Mexico. And then another hurricane destroyed the rafts. They got washed up, probably not too far from here in Galveston Bay. And he spent 9 years living with native people of that part of Texas. The first 4 years he spent as a slave, but eventually they decided he had some properties as a healer, and he gradually taught them into helping him go back to Mexico. So the 242 people who were on the raft, only 4 survived to go back to Mexico. So what did he do when he went back to Spain? Well, he wrote the Emperor Charles V. That's why we know about his expedition. And one of the things he said was, I want to transmit what I saw and heard. In the 9 years I wandered lost and miserable over many remote lands. So he goes back to Spain. What does he do? Head right back to the New World after 9 years of misery. And in fact, he eventually became the governor of what's today part of Argentina, first European to see Iguazu Falls, where we had an IETS meeting. And I think he did that because of the wondrous things that he saw when he was in Florida and then in South America. So I think all of us, have that same sense of wonder in what we do. And I'll bring this up again later, but we are studying reproductive biology, which I think is one of the most wondrous aspects of life. And, my own interests in reproductive biology started when I was a boy. My mother was from Ireland, and we used to go every so often back to Wexford, and my brother and sister would stay at my grandmother's house. I would stay at my cousin's farm. Let's see. Oop, sorry. That's my cousin, John Joe Kavna, Margaret Kavna. This is a cow, Billy. So Billy was 15 years old. So I was only 12. Billy was 15 years old when this picture was taken. That's John Joe's grandfather. And they didn't have a bull on this farm, probably because they were worried about the kids. So Billy came in heat when I was there, and we walked her. I'd actually never seen a bull because they kept the bulls away from us. We walked her about 2 miles down the road to my cousin's uncle's farm where he had purebred Hereford bulls. And so we marched her down the road and we turned her off onto the farm lane. And as soon as we did that, you could hear the bull roar, and he knew she was coming. And that just amazed me. And we brought Billy into the farmyard, and Nettie rolled back the sliding door, and the bull came out and bred Billy. I was just amazed. These 2 massive animals. And a week later, I was at my grandmother's at dinner, and I was saying, and we marched Billy down the road, and the bull was roaring, and he jumped on her. And my grandmother says, "Decent people don't talk about this at the dinner table." So little did I know, I was going to spend the rest of my life studying just those kind of things. So I'm just going to try to talk about this journey in 2 ways, by talking about some of the wonders that I've experienced during my career as a reproductive biologist, and then talk about, some of the companions of the road who had these experiences with me. I think the first IVF calf was in 1981. I was studying effects of heat stress on reproduction, and it became obvious from our own research that most of the reduction in fertility was caused by effects on the embryo. We couldn't really study the embryo. So I went to Alan King's lab at the University of Guelph and learned IVF. And I would call my students like Lynette Edwards and Carlos Orechaga, and they were working on IVF at the same time. So eventually we got it working successfully. And then we thought, well, how do we know any of these embryos are actually competent to become a calf? All we've done is produce them in the lab. So we transferred, I think, 5 embryos, and 3 of them became calves. And to me, this was miraculous. We saw this little embryo in the dish. 9 months later, we have a little bull calf. There's Lynette Edwards, Carlos Oreshiga, Victor Monteroso. So, not a big deal probably in the history of the world, but for us, that was so exciting. Just recently, Tad Sunstergaard was talking about the research that the Celigents led on gene editing, and we were part of one of those projects to make gene-edited Slick Angus and Slick Jersey in collaboration with not just the Celigent, but CEMEX and Bovatech. This is the first calf that was born as part of that project. We called her Elsa, because she was born in the middle of Hurricane Elsa. I mean, in water, standing water, she was born. You know, and you could look at her right away and tell, yep, she inherited the slick gene and it changed her phenotype. I mean, that was wondrous. We were the first people to put bovine embryos in space. And this is Luciano Bonilla, Justin Fear. It's a very long story, but we got the opportunity to put bovine embryos on the Endeavour in the space shuttle back in 2008. And we didn't know for sure when the rocket was going to go off, so I was like hobnobbing with the NASA people and hobnobbing with the Boeing people. And Luciano and Justin were making thousands of embryos so that they had embryos if the space shuttle went up this day, embryos if they went up that day. And we put embryos in space. This is the Endeavour. You can't see, but there are bovine embryos. And this was important for two reasons. It was the first time bovine embryos were ever in space, and the first time bovine embryos stopped developing in space. So none of them became blastocysts. So, I mean, those are pretty momentous things, especially the space shuttle, probably the most exciting thing I was ever part of. But most of my career, like everybody's career, has been much more prosaic. But, you know, it's still so exciting. Like, oftentimes you formulate hypotheses and you don't really think they're going to be true. But it's logical, so you do the experiment. But every so often, yeah, your hypothesis is really true. So like Eliab Estrada Cortez had this hypothesis that if he added choline to the culture medium of bovine embryos, it would affect postnatal phenotype. You know, what is the odds that that would really happen? But it did. The calves produced in the presence of choline had heavier weaning weights, and we've subsequently repeated that several times. And Eliab took this picture, which I think is the coolest picture I've ever had associated with my lab. So we had all these Angus cross recipients and all these little Brahmin embryo calves. And we were working the calves, and as soon as we let them go, they all ran off to their mothers and started suckling. When I was a grad student, I read this book by Dostoevsky, The Demons or the Devils. It's kind of about Russian revolutionaries. But there was this one scene in the book that really struck me, even as a grad student, because I thought it reflected two different ways of thinking about reproductive biology. So in this book, Shatov, who's later killed by a revolutionary, he's talking to this woman, Irina Prokhorovna, and she tells him, "I'm pregnant." And he says, "Rejoice, Irina Prokhorovna. It's a great joy." And she goes, "What kind of joy is it?" Bustling about, cleaning up, working hard as a convict, which in Russia was pretty hard. And he goes, "The mystery of the appearance of a new being. It's a great and inexplicable mystery, Irina Prokhorovna. What a pity you don't understand. There were two people, and all of a sudden there's a third being, a new spirit, whole and complex, such that no human hands could ever create. New thought and new love. It's frightening. There's nothing greater on earth." And she said, "Ah, what nonsense. It's simply a new stage of organic development and nothing more, no mystery at all. And, we are studying one of the most profound aspects of biology. And, at this meeting, we saw Anna Denicold show primordial germ cells at the very instant they were being formed. And Dr. Sugimura's talk on time-lapse photography, it's just incredible. And I think it's important, this is my little advice part of the talk here, we're always beaten down by all the bad things that happen to us. Our grants aren't funded, our papers are rejected, administrators are thinking in new ways for us to fill out forms and take training. Let's not lose track of what we're actually doing. We're very fortunate to be able to study what we study. I had a student, Morgan Peltier. Here he is in 1996. There's Rocio Rivera, I know some you know. Fabiola Paula Lopes. And he used to come into my office periodically, and he would say, I've had a eureka moment. And it was usually some small little thing, but he was so excited that he had gotten some new insight that he didn't have before. And I've tried to retain that way of thinking, in my own life, to celebrate every little insight, every little accomplishment, because they're hard won sometimes. So those are some of my wondrous experiences. I just want to talk about some of the people who I got to experience with them, and I'm not going to mention everybody's name because it would take too long, but I appreciate everybody. I would not be winning this award if it wasn't for my grad students, my postdocs, undergrads, visiting scientists in the lab, and all the people I've worked with. So let me just briefly talk about some of the companions on the road. When I was an assistant professor, Bill Thatcher gave me a lot of mentoring, how to deal with grad students, how to deal with rejection of papers, rejection of grants. So, I'm very grateful to him. And he was usually naughty, not nice. He also, like Sophia mentioned, was a recipient of the IETS Pioneer Award in 2014, and this was taken the night that he won that award. There's Anna and Sophia. They organized a party for me last night. Thank you both very much for that. One of the things I like, obviously, is Guinness, but IETS really is an international society, and I've been so fortunate to develop relationships with people all over the world, and many of those relationships have, developed into collaboration as well as friendship. So, here's me and Pat Lonergan. I very much appreciate all of those collaborations. Another good thing about IETS, the football playoffs are always during the IETS meeting. So here's me and my two fellow Packer fans, Milo Wilbank and Roberto Sartori. We beat the Cowboys that year. My IETS brother, Matt Wheeler, giving alcohol to my technician. Amber Brad, who was Rebecca's Kreischer student. The other, I've thought about this a lot. I could be any kind of scientist. Be better at certain kind of science than others. But, it's the thrill of the discovery. But I'm so lucky to be an animal scientist because I get to work with farmers, I get to work with livestock, I work on these beautiful facilities, so I'm very grateful for that. These are some dairy producers from New Zealand who came to UF to look at some of our slick Holstein calves. We've done a lot of research lately at Wynn Ranch down in St. Lucie County, Florida. Produced, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of embryos with them. And, you know, this is, I just noticed this today. I didn't notice it at first. So this is Frank Lewis. He's the manager of the ranch. And then these other people are UF people. Shao Batar from Brazil, Serdal Dickman from Turkey, Lainey Heyman from US, Isabel Jimeno from Spain, and Ezra, thank you. It's needed more often now than it used to be. From Egypt, Ezra Ismail. You know, so I mean, this is like the United Nations of research here at a ranch in the deep south part of Florida, and you know, everybody has a great time down there. We also work with a lot of dairy farms. Probably several people in the audience know Nilo Francisco, who is manager of the Repro program at Alliance Dairy. And there's Mazur Sagir and Tachi Maya, Alejandro Ojeda. You know, couldn't do what we do without people like Nilo helping us. And not only do I get to work with the farmers, I get to work with the animals. We probably spend most of our time in the lab, but I notice I don't have any pictures from the lab except for the space shuttle. But I love, you know, still working with cows, sheep, pigs occasionally. I think, Sophia, this is Slick Gator Sophia that we produced a lot of embryos from. And here is another Slick Angus calf as part of Camila Cuellar's project. This is gene edited, or its sire was gene edited, so I guess it's gene edited with the Slick gene. So, I mean, that's just so thrilling to be doing these things. And then the last thing I want to say, or maybe almost the last thing, I really want to thank all the people who've worked with me in the lab, my grad students, undergrads, postdocs, visiting scientists. Wouldn't be successful without them. When I was a grad student, my major professor, Ed Hauser, he taught me a lot of things. And he always used to say, I only do experiments to educate graduate students. I used to say, that's crazy. I do experiments because I want to discover things. But I've come to realize, you know, how fulfilling it is to participate in experimentation with graduate students. So this is Andrew Majeski. He really did fall asleep on the lab bench, and then we all ran up and took pictures with him. These are pretty tough-looking grad students. You have to be careful. Froilan Sosa, Eliab Estrada Cortez, and you can read his barcode, Thiago Amaral, UF, Department of Corrections. I know many of you know Jeremy Block, so I put this picture in here when Jeremy was young and handsome. There you go, Jeremy. Another little piece of advice. My first independent lab was in 1984, and then in 1991 I started taking pictures of the lab every year and put the pictures on the wall of the lab. And it's been so important for me to do that because it helps me years later remember what the team was like in 1991 or 2001 or whatever. And so this is the very first picture we took. This was a young and handsome Alan Ely. Many of you know Cyril Barros, probably. Our photographer has gotten better over the years, so that's the last one we took. It's a great way to help you remember and appreciate everybody that you had with you. Last thing, the IETS is a very organized society, very capable of planning ahead. So a few years ago, I won the IETS Distinguished Service Award, and one of the very nice things of that is you get a lifetime membership to IETS. So this is my homepage, my individual IETS page, and if you look closely, you can see that they have decided that my lifetime membership expires in 2029. Now, I'm not sure how they're planning on achieving that, but I thought, as long as my heart keeps ticking, I should be okay. That's my wife is Dorothy. So, thank you very much. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, IETS. This is another great thing about there's no other, I don't think there's any other prize like this. This is what, a placenta from Keith Bettridge's wife to sign that? So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.